Hi, welcome to the Frontend Coffee Break, the podcast, the podcast where we take a break from our everyday lives and enjoy a cup of Joe, tea, whatever beverage, talk front end, talk development, and yeah, as usual. Chucho, wait a minute, where are you, man?
Today it's was an office day for me. I come here once a week, and usually when we have a recording, I go back home so that we can record there with all the thingies and the whatchamacallits. But today I couldn't do it. A lot of meetings, so I am recording from the office. I fortunately have a microphone that I can. Oh my god! that's so
Sorry, them cats.
I do have the nice equipment here, and well, that's the reason why I'm here. This
Exactly, I was going to say that
office
you are
day.
very well prepared, so thank you for bringing your microphone in, and yeah, sound is great as usual. Just background is different. All right. Today, something that I think every big company might have or want to have, or best practices, standards, guidelines. How to make sure people code in the same way, how to make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel if something's already invented or already defined, that it's well proven. So I think first of all, we should start with the definition, maybe, definition of
Yes.
what is a best practice.
Well, so we're going to be talking about best practices in general, the way that we apply them in Cognizant Netcentric, and a few recommendations, horror stories, which I have one. I'm going to tell it once we define this, and why you should or should not use them. So, what is a best practice? We could take the definition that we find in I don't know if it's in the wiki or a definition that we find, and the definition would be commercial or professional procedures that are accepted as prescribed as being correct or most effective. So, what does this mean, Ricardo?
Good question. So I guess a way of coding or a way of writing your code that has proven to be, like it says here, effective or correct or just proven to work, right? So you don't have to think, okay, when I start a new project or when I start a new something, how do I do that? How do I organize my code? How do I write my classes, my functions? How do I name them? All those things, they already plenty of standards out there, industry or company standards, where it's just, you're faster. I think it just, in the end, is being more productive on doing something that you do every day, right?
Well, in the end, this seems very much like patterns. It's a pattern of working, a pattern of doing things that we've talked about in episode 35, the patterns and anti-patterns. I mean, in the end, those are proven solutions to recurring problems. And this is the best practices in coding conventions is basically the same thing. Proven solutions for recurring problems. What is a problem? How do you structure the code? What is a problem? How do you name your variables? What is a problem? Well, there's several things. And what is a proven solution? Well, they call them best practices. So that would be the general definition.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know if we can cover all the dimensions, but just so many things, right? I mean, you could say naming conventions, like, okay, you could use BEM for CSS, but also for JavaScript. How do you name your functions? Like, you could just try to do it yourself because you learned, but if there's proven ways to be more effective, like using the keywords like get, set, and things like that, maybe it's just easier for everybody to understand. And it works quite well with mid-size, maybe bigger teams, but let's discuss later if it works on a super big teams. I'm not so super sure.
Okay. Yeah. So what would be the benefits of following best practices?
We already said it. I believe it's just being more productive, right? Not having to think about, okay, how are we gonna structure this? How are we gonna write this thing? How do I, again, my selectors, my classes, what things do I need to do? It's already like outlined for me. So I guess I have to think less and focus on what's important, which is maybe the logic or the actual solution, not just how to write it. No? What do you think?
Well, yes, and also what I think one of the great benefits of it is, as you say, you already have a convention that tells you, okay, this is the way that you're going to write classes. This is where you're going to place the files. This is how you're going to do this. And in a big company, it doesn't matter the size of the project, regardless of the size of the project. But if you have a big company that has several projects all around, and they more or less follow same baseline of best practices, it will be easier for your developers to move from one project to another and be productive faster, because they don't need to learn how things are done in the new project. They're supposed to be done in more or less the same way. It's like, okay, in project A, they told me that variables should be really well named, and when they go to project B, most likely is that they follow. If this is a best practice, if this is a practice that is followed by the company, this will probably be something that they'll find there, and then you can just continue. They don't need to change the way that they think. Also, when they get there, if you have whatever best practice of regarding on how to or where to place, for example, utility functions, they know that this is the way that they put them in all the projects. They know where they have to look for it. So I think it benefits the rotation. And sometimes this is something that you might want to have, being able to move people to support a project that has more work, or to move people because a project is about to finish and I want them to put them in somewhere else. I don't know. But I think that's
this
also
is a good point. It's a good point. I think we all have been in a position where now you drop into a project, maybe a legacy project. It's so much different, and they use like many different things. Like, oh man, where do I find these things? How do I? So it takes so long to get started that you're burning time, burning money when you could have just delivered something if the structure were the same. If instead of using, I don't know, whatever design patterns for JavaScript, if we all agree on classes or whatever it is, right? That then okay, I already know how to work with this, so it's much faster. I agree. Although, a question I have with this is like, how feasible is this with so many technologies nowadays and front? And I see the benefits, but I don't know.
I mean, for example, we are currently working with projects. A few years ago, we mainly worked on vanilla JavaScript and Sass. We were basically using that. And we only had a few projects that were using, for example, Post CSS regarding on preprocessors. And very few projects that were using frameworks. I think we started with Angular. No, we started with Backbone.
Wow.
First, but we left Backbone after I think a couple of years, and then we went on Angular, and now we have a lot of work in React. We actually have a lot of projects that are working in React, and as you say, we might have best practices that are done for React that might not be the same in other projects. And what do you do in these cases? I think that this is just there's a lot of best practices that do apply globally,
right? Yeah.
And then you'll have to have best practices that apply specifically for certain projects. If you have React projects, they'll have your best practices for that. And if you move someone to that kind of project, they will need to learn those best practices. But when you move them to other React related projects, for example, they should be using hopefully the same best practices.
Right. And we should differentiate between using some sort of industry or framework standard where like, okay, already the framework provider or the library already has a way to work, and what we write ourselves at Cognizant Netcentric to maybe enhance this sort of guideline standard or to create something that doesn't exist. Do you have any examples that we've done here in the past where we've had our own sort of guidelines standards?
Yes, for example, I think when we started working with grids, we started working using SUSE. I think that was so the best practice is that if you needed to use a grid system, we had SUSE. We created this whole I think we had a documentation on how to work with SUSE, how to create the grid system that you needed in your project, and that's what we use. Our best practice was to use SUSE. There were other solutions. There were the possibility of using different things, but that was something that we created documentation for, and we tried to teach all the people that was working with us. This is the grid system that we're using. Then eventually we grew out of SUSE, especially when CSS became better and we had good grid support. But still, that for example would be one type of document best practices that we developed inside the Cognizant Netcentric. It was not something that was like a coding standard or a best practice as far as I knew in the industry itself, but it was like one way of working with grids, and that's the one that we
for us, yeah,
adopted.
that makes sense for our setup, our way of working, our maybe AEM, right? Working with Adobe products. That makes sense. Yeah, got it. What
Do
else?
you know any? Okay, another one that I don't know if you managed to work with that one, because it is. Remember back in the day, and I'm not talking about that long ago. The industry, I remember that for several years, the industry was obsessed with pixel perfection.
Yeah.
I remember working in projects, but it's like the distance between the top of the letter T has to be 16 pixels from the border of the element that's just above. And from the baseline of the letter E, it has to be 32 pixels to the element below. And achieving pixel perfection in an easy way was not an easy task. We developed here, it was an incredible work. I don't know, I guess I would call it a framework that was the font normalization, where we created mixins that would allow you to create actual pixel perfect designs. You could just grab text and you use this framework, and it would make sure that responsively, with responsiveness, I mean not with like drive responsibly. No, it would make sure that all the distance were perfect.
Right.
And that was like a super way of working that we had here. And the idea was that we tried to standardize that as a best practice in Cognizant Netcentric. Like, hey, you have a project that needs pixel perfection. This is our best practice. Using these mixins is how you're going to do it.
Yeah. It's thankfully clients or everybody, developers, clients, QA designers. I think we've all now come to understand that if you render something in Firefox, might be slightly different in Safari and Chrome.
Yeah.
Surely overall more or less the same, but you should not look for it's 10 pixels and everything. Maybe this one is 11, and is 10, and that's absolutely fine, because the how do you say this? The cost of trying to fix this perfection, it's not in the balance. It's not worth it, right? You spend so much money to try to do that when there's actually just no visual difference. So yeah,
but we do have the way to do it if needed.
Yeah, we do.
But it is a bit complex in the sense that it's a framework. I would say just you can use it, you can apply it. It adds a bit of complexity, but it makes sure that you have that pixel perfection that, fortunately, at least in my opinion, the industry is no longer looking for.
Yeah, agreed.
And do you know any best practices for example, that you are using in your project? That
best practices for writing CSS, I think, I mean, not only BEM, but I remember reading at some point in our immense wiki, Confluence wiki, where like using the shorthands, I think for properties was not encouraged. Was like, I mean, if you want to add, I don't know, padding bottom, right? You do not add padding colon and then 0, 0, 10, 0. You add the property padding bottom then to 10, right? Because it's more performant. You don't have to overwrite the styles, repaint, whatever it is, right? So these things I like. I don't know of many more, because again, I go back to my initial issue on we are now so big at Cognizant Netcentric that it's hard to define guidelines that would cover like this wide tech stack that we have: React, Angular, Vanilla. So it's hard to follow as well, because we are very big.
But there's, I guess that there are. I mean, we do have a lot of guidelines in Cognizant Netcentric, and there are some that are a little bit more universal. Like, for example, the HTML.
Right.
Or so for this, we do have. I was checking before today's recording a little bit about the old guidelines that were things that you read at the beginning when you joined, and then you eventually learned how to do it, and so you don't need to review them again. And I was reading things like, for example, that we're still currently using the order in which we put attributes in a tag. That classes go first, IDs go afterwards.
Yeah,
there's a reason.
I don't know if I'm following that. I don't know.
This is interesting, because in the end, my thought is that best practices and all these kind of things should serve us as developers, and not the other way around. We
Right.
shouldn't be slaves to standards, to best practices. I mean, there's a reason why they're called best practices. They're good, but we don't have to feel. I think that we don't have to feel enslaved by them.
Yeah, I mean, order the attributes on HTML tags. That feels like slavery. Yeah.
My goodness.
Maybe it's too much. I mean, I do like that at Cognizant Netcentric we have what we also call standards, which is not the best practice, but it's like, okay, this is our standard tool for doing something. Like if you want to do like unit testing, our standard is Jest, right? Because we know that it works, we know how to implement it, and we have experts to do that. If you want, you can use Jasmine or Karma or something else, but our standard, if you ask anybody, would be unit testing. Jest, right? Or if you like do I don't know, a pitch for a client, and they ask you, okay, what is your standard for end-to-end testing? We will say Cypress, because this is our so far standard, right? When it comes to testing, other stuff, other tools like frameworks and stuff, we also have our standards. Not too many, because again, if you constrain yourself with too many standards, then you cannot go out of them, or can you? I don't know. It's complicated.
One standard that we do use, I think, in most of the projects is the linters.
Oh, yes, you're right.
This is something that I think that we still use for the most part in every project. And I was surprised when we started using it. I was surprised because of the
how easy it is, or the origin?
The easy part, yes, of course, because it's very simple to add to a project. But where it came from, we started working with Airbnb.
Yeah.
Coding the linter that was defined by the Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away. Like, what do you mean in Airbnb? I mean, that's a company that works for whatever, and we're using their their linter configuration by default.
They did it
and
first.
It's interesting.
Yeah, they open source their linting for the JavaScript, and I think actually our current ESLint configuration, which is open source on our GitHub account, I think extends the Airbnb configuration. So we based on it, and then we extend with our own what we think it's best for us. That's cool. Actually, that's cool. You can check that out, and also a Stylelint for CSS. We also have a package for that, which is a one-liner you drop into a project, and you make sure that the CSS and JavaScript will at least follow the same, colon, semicolon, spacing, brackets. This will be the same, which is already a lot, I think.
Yeah, and as I said, although this is a baseline where you start from, and for the most part, I think that every single project that I work with, we start with this, but we have a few exceptions depending on the project, because there's, for example, things that I don't like when it forces you to do things one way. It's like, nope, this is not something that I agree. And then you add the exception for that. Usually, in all the projects that I've been, it's very little that you need to change.
Yes.
But there are a few things that you do change because they don't apply to the team's standard. And that's funny, because it's all interesting, because I've had discussions with the team's members like, hey, we have this. We have two options of doing it. This is the default one, but we have this one that it's also nice, and others have used it before. Which one do you want? And they decide A or B. And if we decide to follow the standard, that's fine. If we decide to follow our own different standard for whatever reason, because we are more comfortable with it, we change the linting. But we all have the same base. And I think that when you move to other projects, you still follow the same, more or less the same coding standards. It's going to be more or less the same, and you just need to tweak a few things depending on the project that you're in.
I guess, for ESLint, I think it's so well integrated into VS Code and other IDEs that really, when you change project, the IDE will pick up the configuration, and then you click save, it will automatically format the code for you. So really, you don't have to think much. And now, I think, I don't know if any project that they're not using a bundler, but if you use a bundler like ESBuild or Webpack, whatever, if you add more spaces, less spaces, colons, semicolons, the bundle doesn't care. In the end, the output will be the same. So it's just about prettifying the code. But it's cool. I think it's cool that we open source these two packages.
Now we're using this ESLint that has been open source, and that's that we're adopting that as a best practice. And we've already talked about some of the best practices that we used to have. Now, if we wanted to create a new best practice, for example, what type of best practices do you think we should be writing about?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's easy. Just go to a Confluence, create a new page, and you're done. You have the best practice now. Anybody can do it. That's the fun part, collaboration. But how about, I don't know.
React?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the thing that we always question ourselves is like, we do not have to replicate MDN documentation. We do not have to replicate React documentation. That makes no sense, right? You gotta write things that, okay, I've encountered these problems before working with whatever, React, and this is the way to solve them, so you don't have to Stack Overflow, ask ChatGPT to do it. You know already, check the wiki, and now you know how to do it beforehand. So I think it's usually problems, right? When you encounter things that you do over and over, and okay, let me document that so the next person that comes already have a solution.
So basically, we're saying that we do encourage best practices because they do make the code more maintainable. Makes it easy to move people around.
Yep.
It's basically makes your life easier, but you don't need to create from scratch these best practices. You can have your own best practices, but you don't need to create them from scratch. You can actually use the best practices that are all around. And the thing that you need to document is basically say which ones you're using and link to those documents that already exist, and maybe write about exceptions potentially. I do remember that although we were following, we are very quality oriented, and we used to have a lot more documentation regarding best practices. At one point, we moved away from doing the documentation ourselves and precisely start using what was already created and say, this is what we're following, that is what we're going to use. And I think that's very practical.
Yeah, and it's hard to enforce. I mean, now our conversation, we're at a point where should we or can we even enforce best practices in a company as big as ours? When you have hundreds of developers, I think community front-end wise, we're 120, 130. How can you even attempt to enforce a best practice with 100 developers that work in different stacks?
I think that there are different levels of best practices.
Okay.
You have, let's say, core best practices, and then you have things that are built on top of that. But I think that core best practices should be enforced.
Okay.
Like, for example, we're using in our projects, we're using as a best practice, because it is a best practice, we're minifying code.
Yeah.
Not to make it, not obfuscating it, but just to make it more performant.
Yeah.
And I think a best practice is, well, since we're already minifying code, try to write, the variable name.
Coffee. All right.
Mm-hmm. When you're writing your variable names, make them meaningful. When you're writing your function names, make them meaningful. These are the kinds of best practices that I would encourage, and I would try to not force, but that I would strongly encourage people to follow.
Yeah, but we do force them, I think, in pull requests, right? I mean, when you go to a pull request, if you see function A returns I plus C, you say, come on, are you writing minified code already? Just write long, meaningful names.
So this is, for example, a best practice that we enforce, that it's a universal best practice.
Correct.
And I think that there's a lot of best practices like these that can be enforced all over the company.
That's
that
true.
Are, like I said, like the core best practices. And then we could have suggestions. Like, as you said, if you want to use unit testing, Jest is the potentially the one that you want to use, or this or that. But this is what we support. You can do whatever you want, but this is the one that we encourage you to do. But we're not going to force you to do it. So then you have the other that are not core, but that we've known, that we've had people that have worked with, that they're proving to work. This is the one that we encourage, but we leave people to have a little bit of creativity.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right. I mean, and get another question I had for you is if all these best practices and standards are hindering innovation and they're preventing us from creating new stuff, or they're blocking our creativity, imagination. If we always use the same stuff, maybe we never innovate. So,
I do not completely agree on this. Okay. Although, it is true that when you have a best practice, like for example, BEM.
Yeah.
We've been writing BEM for ever. Since I joined the company, I remember that it was the first time that I heard about them. And they told me, don't you use BEM? It's like, what do you mean, don't you use BEM? I've never heard of it. Of course I don't. And I had a discussion back then with Oliver about what I thought about when he showed me what it was, what I thought about it. And I definitely, for example, would have never considered BEM when I was working with the way that I was working with. So sometimes when you have a way of working, it might hinder your creativity for sure. So it is very important from time to time to look into we've encouraged this a lot to read into what the industry is doing, to see what the new innovations or the new things, the new trends are, because potentially maybe suddenly working with Tailwind makes sense. We're now doing a lot of, for example, edge delivery service projects, and maybe adding Tailwind wouldn't be such a bad idea. And this is not something that we normally would be doing, but we don't know. Maybe it is something that we should be doing.
Yeah.
So I do think that they can hinder. So because of this, I think you should always be on the lookout of what's happening around the world. It's fine that you do things the way that you would like to do it, but you need to look outside. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think you sold it to me very well. I think, we need to follow this, but also be open to change and challenge them, right? I mean, if you are, I don't know, looking at something else, videos on the Farship YouTube channel, whatever it is, and you say, okay, well, maybe there's different ways of bundling your code now, or there are different ways of writing whatever it is, right? With if you're using B, we have Byte, there's new build systems, whatever. Challenge it and say, maybe our standards are not good enough anymore. It's outdated. So I like what you said about being open to try new things, but without falling into this sort of trap where every week there's a new framework and we have to in the next project we're going to use a new framework, or maybe not. Like really, if you need to speed things up, be productive, and be in production in no time, maybe it's not the time to try a new framework, right?
Now, I would like to give a little bit of a warning, because this is a story that happened to me. Following, I used to work in a project before the company that I used to work before this one. That they wanted to follow best practices. They read into the industry and see what was the best practice. At that point, I remember that one of the things that they told you is that do not use tables.
Tables, okay.
Yeah, tables. And this, of course, means do not use tables for layouts. But I remember going to the project, looking at the code and saying, hey, why is this table only divs? Why aren't you using tables? And then one of my colleagues said, well, because it's not a best practice.
Oh, no.
The best practice is not to use a table. And I looked at them and I said, yes, on non-table items.
Right.
If you're showcasing a table, you should be using a table, because that's what they're built for.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they were like, oh, okay. Of course, it gave us a lot of problems.
Yeah, of course.
Because we have to imitate the way a table worked with divs.
Oh no.
And it was horrible.
Oh no.
But that could be like a warning. It's like, should I use best practices? Yes, but be careful with it.
Yeah, understand them, right? I mean, if you just take them from face value, no tables, but it's tabular data, just no tables. So please use tables for tabular data. Screen readers, accessibility, it's important.
Exactly. Okay, so any last words?
No, I think we can leave it for the audience to tell us if they use best practices, if they hate them, they are boring, they don't want to follow them.
Which best practice they use?
Yeah, let us know.
Yep.
Is that it? That's it, man. That's it.
That's it, I think.
Thank you, everybody. See you in the next Frontend Coffee Break.
See you then. Bye-bye.